Hello and welcome to today's episode. We have on the show a legend, a Canadian legend who has traveled the world, he's been learning, and for over 40 decades he's been a practitioner, he's been a teacher. His name is Dr. Terry Willard. If you do not know Terry, well, you are in for a treat. You're about to meet a wonderful man, great conversationalist who's a wealth of knowledge. So during this conversation, sure, we delve into the deep kind of micro aspects of nutrition and digestion, but one of Terry's gifts I think you're going to walk away with is pulling it out, bigger, broader perspective. And from that perspective, you're going to gain more clarity. You're going to gain more enjoyment from your food. You're going to help increase your digestion and just be able to live life more to the fullest. So Dr. Terry has got a wealth of knowledge, track record, history, again, of lecturing, speaking around the world. And it was a real pleasure and honor to have him on the show. You can find him at drterrywillard.com. He's got a wonderful blog. We mentioned some of the articles that he has up there and posted. He's also the director of the Wild Rose College of Natural Healing. That's a great herbal school that you can take your learning further. So without further ado, let's dive right in. Enjoy. All right. Hello. Welcome. We have Dr. Terry Willard on the call with us here today.
Great. Hi, Malcolm.
Awesome to have you. So, theme of the show here, our relationship to food, knowing that it's a journey, that we all have to kind of navigate our world through the way of food and nutrition. And of course, I know our conversation is going to be a broader one in terms of what we define as food and nutrition. And absolutely, I see herbs as a really key food group, and one that I'm really grateful for you and your son and how you've really opened up that world to me. I wanted to start off just chatting about to you and in your life and your journey, and as it's related to food and to nutrition and to herbs and where it all began and the things that you've learned along the way. And I know from that conversation we're going to pull out all kinds of gems that are going to be applicable to those listening. They can apply it into their life based upon your learnings and your experience.
Well, great. I do agree that food is an extremely important thing all the way around. I grew up in an era in the 60s where the biggest theme was you are what you eat. And obviously, biochemically, we're what we eat. It's very, very important what we eat. But I'm here to say that we're not just what you eat. You're what you absorb. So it's not just a matter of putting it in your mouth and swallowing it. It's how your whole digestive tract works and how that functions. And that's part of where the herbs come in. But when you combine the herbs and what you eat, and a subject I'm really interested in these days is mouthfeel, that puts a consciousness around mindfulness of eating, and how you eat will really determine a tremendous amount of things about your health.
Yeah, that's amazing. I remember actually kind of in my young idealist days, I just got back from traveling from India, and I was a vegetarian, and I was like getting into raw foods. And I remember visiting the Wild Rose College, the clinic, in fact, and it was for student practicum. And I had all kinds of things, wrong with me in that sense. I just, despite eating, the quote unquote best diet that I conceived of possible, I was still not feeling the results and not the health. And I remember you bringing in that aspect, that awareness to me.
Well, it's very important. And I too went through that journey. I was a strict vegetarian for 12 years. And then I went and started living in a teepee. And they told me that meat was actually the best thing for me to have every once in a while. I incorporated it and found a huge difference. And it really depends quite a bit on your environment. I mean, if you want to be a raw foodist, that's great in the Arctic Canada or Alberta or whatever you want to say, but not in the winter. In the winter, you've got to cook some of your vegetables to have them hot, to be able to take some warmth in there. Because I would often see a lot of my students come in, especially in January and February, suffering from too much cold disease, not enough heat in their body. So you still can become a vegetarian, but most of us, I like to say, you eat what your ancestors ate more than anything else. So if your ancestors were Amerindians, Indians, well, maybe buffalo and berries are one of the best things you can eat. And if your ancestors came from India, maybe being a vegetarian is the best. So you have to go back almost 500 years and see what your ancestors ate on a regular basis, in my mind, to determine what one of your best diets are. Some of your ancestors were fish eaters because they came from the greater UK area, and therefore fish is a good, gentle food for you to put into your diet quite a bit.
Yeah, no, it's so true. I think it's that balance between, like you say, I remember it was great advice I've heard you say before. If you're ever confused about food nutrition, which, a lot of us are, right? Whether you're young or you're older, you get at this some point, you begin to question the way that you were raised. I mean, I had Luca Simons on for a call, and she was raised in the most idyllic way, as one we'd all dream about in terms of, on the land, whole foods, everything prepared from scratch. But as a teenager, seeking her own way, she rejected and rebelled against all that. And we all have to begin to seek out our own way. And I remember you saying, if you're ever confused, go back to what your ancestors ate. It's a great starting place to then move forward from, and to have that as your base. And I think it's so true. It becomes that fine balance between, what were your ancestors eating, and how's that easy for your physiology, because it's what it's used to in terms of that long spectrum of time, but then also balancing it with your environment and your place, which you're also what you're speaking to, right? For me, being in here in Alberta or Alberta, far up north in Canada in the middle of the winter, yeah, we need to adapt to that, as well as keep in mind what our ancestors ate.
And you brought up some very good points there. I think it's extremely healthy, especially coming out of your teens going into your 20s, to be able to alter your diet completely radically and then settle back to what's a good diet. So lots of times a vegetarian diet or a raw food diet or whatever diet, mucusless diet, is a good transition for you to go through, for you to be able to get some of the crap out of your body and be able to settle into what's a good diet. So it's not Wonder Bread and pasta or white rice and things like that. You just don't make a jump over those things. So sometimes it's good to clean the slate, as it were, and then go back. So I'm wholeheartedly believing that a vegetarian diet is good for a while for a lot of people. All of my kids definitely went through the vegetarian stage. They're all not vegetarians at this stage. But it was a healthy transition. So they got to be able to go through those things. And it's great to reject your ancestral diet while you're in your teens and be a little revolutionary and things like that. And some of it's cost, some of it's convenience, some of it's peer pressure. But to settle out in your diet, because your diet is an individual thing, it's quite different than what maybe your group might be.
Yeah, no, it's so true. Yeah. And so how about, let's dive into what you started off with. You're not what you eat, but what you digest. I think there's a lot of power in that, because, even once you get it all figured out, which you may never, it's always changing. And I'm really a big believer in this idea of intuitive eating and adapting just to what your body needs. It becomes so individual for yourself, moment to moment, day to day, year to year. And not to be in an overwhelming, daunting kind of way of like, oh, I'm never going to figure it out. Like, you get to this place, and I'm sure you're there too, of just that comfortability of like, okay, I know what my body needs and wants, and you kind of navigate day to day. So even still having that figured out, you could be eating those right foods, but it's really about that digestion, that absorption.
Absolutely. Again, you could be eating the most perfect foods in the world, and if you don't digest them, they don't help. So I put together a 7-part blog on my blog site, drterrywillard.com, and it's called Tongue to Bum. And this whole process goes through the different stations along the subway called Paracelsus, to be able to help you digest your food and what could happen at different stages, and how to slightly diagnose it to be able to see what you might need. You might need some digestive enzymes, you might need to cook more, you might need probiotics, whatever the case may be, to be able to put the whole thing together. And that's part of a larger blog set that I have, which is about a 20 blog series on digestion in itself. And so by being able to work with how the digestion works will really help quite a bit. On the other end, one of the most important things, because it's been shown that you can increase your digestive enzymes as much as 40% by being involved in preparing the food. So your hydrochloric acid and your digestive enzymes in your pancreas will go up as much as 40% before the first morsel of food is put in your mouth. Now, this is something that MD doctors don't have at all. Now, the marketers have got this down really well. How many times you walked into a mall and all of a sudden you're craving cinnamon buns? Or walking by a theater and want popcorn. We sense it, we smell it, and all of a sudden we're starting to crave those foods. And by doing that, we're increasing our digestive enzymes. Now, I realize that a lot of us don't have a chance to really be preparing it, but even walking into the kitchen while it's being prepared and smelling it. But a lot of us have busy lives, we can't even do that. So the next best thing is to eat mindfully. And in the process of eating mindfully, you get a chance to be able to really function with your food. No, taking an Instagram picture of your food is not connecting to your food and being mindful, but literally smelling it, looking at it, tasting the morsels. And there's been some really interesting books on this. One of the ones I'm really into these days is called Mouthfeel, by the same guy who wrote the umami books and a bunch of sushi books, and he goes through how the different textures and how it feels in your mouth will help you be more mindful. I mean, look at popcorn. Popcorn is a very interesting case in itself. Yes, it might be a fast food, but it's been shown that it opens up your emotional consciousness when you eat it. And when the anthropologists looked this deeply, they found that the only time that we really could get that crunch as a hunter-gatherer, when we've eaten a big meal and we're chewing on the little bones, the ribs and stuff that gives us a crunch, and we're feeling content. And that's literally hardwired into our system. So eating popcorn when you go into a movie kind of opens you up to be able to get the emotional nuances of the movie beyond just the intellectual and the visual cinematography of the whole thing. So popcorn can have a role like this. Different types of mouthfeel can have different types of application, which is kind of interesting to note.
Yeah, no, that's so true. It's really curious, and oftentimes, we get. I mean, I know I went through a period of, again, trying to eat the perfect diet, where there's certain biological things that you maybe aren't thinking about, right? That crunch and that kind of callback to that certain part of time of our ancestry, and like feeling guilty, like this is bad, or I can't indulge in that. But really, there's something there, right? In terms of that deep emotional aspect.
And sometimes these foods can be considered fun foods. So the macrobiotics got it down really well. You eat 82% for your overall health, and you have 18% set aside for fun foods.
Right.
Approximately. I'm using loose terms here because it's actually 17.5%, but who wants to get picky here? But the idea of to have a little bit of fun foods in your life makes your whole life a lot easier, and you don't feel as guilty. Yeah. It's what you eat on a regular basis that builds your health and builds your constitution, builds your health reserve, your tissue reserve. But every once in a while, it's nice to go out on Saturday night and tip back a few or whatever is in your lifestyle to do. So to have a little bit of fun food makes the rest of your life more sparkful, because we want peaks and valleys in our life, and in my life I believe it's really good to cleanse or detox 2 to 4 times a year, and by doing that kind of things, you don't feel quite as guilty. You don't quite feel as guilty if you do a preeminent strike detox before the festive season. You detox before you retox, and then maybe you have to detox again.
Right. Yeah. And in terms of, again, coming back to our ancestors, right, a lot of this information was coded in. There, like you say, there was rituals, there was ceremonies, there was times of feasting, there was times of, sometimes it was forced upon us in terms of famine.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so had all these kinds of ebbs and flows, and now in our culture and our society, we're literally kind of the world of the me, and I get to kind of create my own reality where food is available 24/7, 365. These types of things, we need to bring that awareness back in and consciously create those times and those periods.
Yes.
Yeah.
Our ancestors had things like Ramadan, Lent, Passover, vision seeking and stuff like that, forms of fasting.
Yeah.
They also really, really, like, we're hardwired to like sweets. We'd eat sweets, and we're walking along in the fall and we see a berry bush. We're going to hunker down and probably not tell anyone else about it and just eat as many berries as possible. The problem is we have too many berry bushes around. They're called 7-Eleven Max convenience stores. They're everywhere. Run for your lives. The bushes are attacking us with little sugary treats. And so most of us have overdone it a lot in that area. And so we have to literally program in to be able to know when we have festival times where we can go through those things and have cleansing times, fasting times, or more regulated diet times.
Yeah, for sure. And another thing that was, so I love that, the 80-20, and your son Yarrow, he's so great. I love his terminology of being a flexitarian. He obviously got that from you, right? Just...
A flexitarian is one of the best things to have, because if you're too strict and too focused on things, that becomes a health problem in itself. And I can't tell you over the 40 plus years that I've been in this industry that one of the biggest health problems I see is people being too static or too fanatical into their point of view, and that becomes a health issue into itself. And that causes stiffness in their body, like arthritis and inflammation and stuff like that. Exactly what they're trying to avoid, they're creating by being too strict.
Yeah.
And it's good to have rules, but wasn't rules meant to be broken?
Yeah, everything in moderation, right? No,
Yeah.
I know I definitely went down that path, and then that was, unfortunately, I was able to kind of get out of that. But that's part of the learning. And sometimes, like we talked about, you got to take your own path, take your own way, but be open, be aware. And I think this is the deeper lessons that mindfulness and mindful eating presents. What I'm coming to realize is that if we're truly deeply mindful, we can have that time period where, like you say, the 18% or the 80-20 rule, where it's all good. And then there's those other times where, sometimes the tendency to like, oh, eat that chocolate bar, eat that whatever it is, just you kind of scarf it down because you don't want to really sit and feel and be with that food and know how it's experiencing. But if you are truly mindful, you can get those messages, right? You can really actually know, was that popcorn good for me? Probably was, or not, and then you can experience it like your subway of peristalsis going through the digestive system. Where's it off? What are the signs and the signals? And I wanted to touch upon right when you first mentioned it, this idea of self-diagnosis. These little hints, these little tools, these messages that the body gives us. I think it's again something that's been taught and is within all cultures throughout time, that they had this kind of wisdom that was passed down, whether it was from your mother, grandmother, or it was the local healer and shaman, where we'd learn how to read the language of the body and be able to listen to those messages. And I was wondering, maybe we could just touch into that, if there's anything, obvious or more deep or whatever it is that you like to share in terms of, that kind of the idea of the self-diagnosis, which even framing it that way sounds a little clinical. Because again, even like burping, even the indigestion, that's a message, that's a signal of the body that we can learn to recognize and begin to fine-tune, how we're approaching our life and our diet. Everything is, again, that constant feedback.
Mm-hmm. And you're quite right. Some of these things are cultural and some of them are ancestral. Like, for example, in China, it's highly praised to burp at a meal. In fact, your social status is often determined to how loud your burp can be at a meal. I lived in China for a while and spent time there, as you know, and that was, and I was good because I'm a good burper. And it means you like the food so much you ate it fast. But you're also talking about a culture that suffered huge amounts of famine over the ages. And so you got to put it in that context. But one of the biggest problems is, as soon as we've swallowed food, as far as our consciousness is concerned, it might have traveled all the way to Alpha Centaurus and gone into a subconscious. We don't even know that it exists until it comes out the other end,
Right.
Maybe 18 hours later. And most people aren't even conscious enough to connect the two. But so it's a matter of, instead of self-diagnosis, I'd like to use the word body awareness. An awful lot of people get bloated after they eat. And lots of times that comes down to food combination. So if you eat something like protein, like meat or something like that, and then you have a dessert after that, well, the sugar will ferment with the meat, and that'll cause gas, and it'll make you feel bloated, it'll make you burp, and it'll do all those kinds of things that you might not want to, and just don't feel very good actually. So if you're aware of that, you can find out that this is the only time that your mother wasn't right. You should eat the dessert first and then the meal after, because the sugars will go through your digestive tract at about 10 times faster than the proteins. If I put protein or sugar on top of protein, it's going to ferment and cause gas in my digestive tract and actually make things go down the one-way street the wrong way, coming up this way. But if I eat something sweet before, or traditionally in, let's say, Europe at tea time at 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, then I can have a little bit of protein later at the 6 or 7 o'clock, and there's going to be no problem. But even a half hour before or 3 hours after would be suitable time to have something sweet. So dessert is in the wrong order. It should have been first, just like you were trying to assist your mother when you were a kid. No, I want my dessert first. Because contrary to what my kids thought, well, I'm full, but I have a separate stomach for my dessert. We do not have a dessert stomach. We're not a cow. We don't want to take it in our lumen and be able to ferment it and cough it up and chew it again and then spit it down, chew our cud, as it were. So you have to be aware of those feelings, or how long it's associated with your eating and you're defecating. Is it runny? Does it float? Does it sink? All of these things will have a large amount of awareness on how your body is handling the foods. And let's not forget the elf or the shoemaker with his little elves working all night long. If we don't have the proper probiotics, aka fermented foods, or probiotics in our digestive tract, those little elves are working 7/24, trying to continuously being able to work through our body to be able to, literally digest the food, get the vitamins out of it, help for our immune system. Because 70% of our immune system is in our digestive tract in the form of the probiotics and the mucus lining of our digestive tract. So it's really important to be aware of that for our overall health, because again, the old statement, you are what you eat, and I'm saying you are what you absorb, and what actually gets into your body. It's really important to be able to get those nutrients, and lots of times we do that. Everything else takes its own pace and works itself out, as long as we do cleansing on a regular basis too. So one of the axioms that I give my students in the first days of classes is a concept called in, do, out. You are what you put in. And that's not only the food, it's also the emotions related to the food. If you're really pissed off and angry when you're eating the food, you're kind of eating poison. So you want to have good emotions when you're internalizing, and what you do not eliminate. That's who you are. And usually the metabolic functions take care of themselves. So in being the food, the emotions and stuff like that. The do being the metabolic function, maybe the sugar issues and stuff like that. The out be the eliminatory channels. That be the bowels, the kidneys, the skin, and the lungs, and how they release the toxins that are built up in that process. So by keeping those parts of our engines really simply going, they can become as you say, a self-diagnosis or a body awareness function of how well our machine is purring along. Do we have to rev at the stoplight or whatever?
Yeah, and I love what you're saying. I think one of the easiest, best ways to kind of upgrade our diet in a way that has been missing from the last, let's say, even 50, 60 years and in increasing amounts is this idea of fermented foods, right? I mean,
absolutely.
Traditionally, that was a part of every single meal, it was partly what defined cultures, right? Each culture had its own cultures.
It defined cultures because it was a culture itself.
Yeah, exactly. And so fermented foods, they played a role in, pre-digesting the food, right? And we live in a culture now where we're eating, wheat that's been just, dried, ground, and then turned into bread versus going through that stages of fermentation, which helps break it down and makes it more digestible and more absorbable.
Mm-hmm. And not only does it make it more absorbable, it makes it tastier. You can actually get the amino acids active to create that umami flavor, that fifth flavor as it's called, to be able to do it. So you get more pleasure out of it. I mean, I like garlic, but if I take the garlic and turn it into a black garlic, which isn't truly a fermentation, but it's a slow cooking process, a Maillard effect, but that will give it a deeper taste. It's like thousands of times nicer than just garlic.
Yeah.
Or I like cabbage. No question I like cabbage, but if I make it into sauerkraut or into kimchi or something like that, it gives me the probiotics. It gives me a deeper level of taste, and it really helps. But as we tend to do, sometimes we get run away with that. Then we eat too much fermented food, and then we get, SIBO or, SIBO or a small intestinal bacteria overgrowth, which can be a problem. So everything in moderation, again, as you pointed out before. We want a little bit of sauerkraut with our meal, not a whole meal of sauerkraut.
Right. Yeah, that's so true. A lot of these fermented foods, they were accompaniments to the meal, right? And
Yeah, kind of accompaniments or little side dishes.
Yeah. So what are some of your favorite ferments to enjoy? You've mentioned obviously sauerkraut, black garlic.
Well, I still think that sauerkraut and kimchi are real staples. But by far, my favorite thing these days is Tsukumonos. And you're well aware of that. And now I live in the West Coast in a very sustainable piece of land. We Tsukumono almost everything.
Wow.
And so we're eating that on a very, very regular basis. And if people want to know more about Tsukumono, they can take a fermentation course to find out more about how to do fermentation. So sometimes Tsukumonos are translated in English to be quickles. These are pickles you can make in, anywhere from 3 hours. Now that I have a really good fermentation bed created, you can take a cucumber and make it into a pickle in 3 hours.
Right.
Cool. or as you know, you can make pickles in 4 or 5 days really easy by fermenting it. Or my favorite these days for sure is taking kohlrabi and Tsukumono. It's absolutely fantastic. And we've taken a bunch of parsnips and done those too. They're really great. By fermenting them as a quickle or as a Tsukumono, they're very delicious and they're very delicate. And again, this comes out of Japanese cuisine, who are always a little bit more elegant in their food. And the food has so much flavor and so much depth to it, you just don't need to eat as much.
Right.
Because it's fulfilling and satisfying in a small amount.
And you're absorbing more as well, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, if anyone's curious and interested, the Tsukumono, as Terry's describing, it's what he calls a quickle, just this really quick, light ferment. It's taking those lactic acid bacterias, begin working on the food, whatever it is, and pre-digest it. And him and I did a course together called Fermentation for Life, and that was one of the modules that Terry featured, and it was new to me, and it was such a great little interesting way to process your food and make it more flavorful, make it more digestible. Another thing I've yet to experiment, I thought I'd just bring this up now, is just recently I heard about this idea of taking the koji culture. So this is the asperilla that is used to make miso, tempeh, this kind of thing. There's a movement now of people beginning to work with that culture and using it to tenderize meat. So you take these spores and you put it on meat and it begins to tenderize it, ferments it down. So that's kind of new on my list of ones I want to try. And that's what I love about fermentation is it's such a vast field. I mean, I know when we first set up that course, it was, okay, what are we going to add? What are we going to not add? Because,
so much.
There's so much. And just as like exactly what you're saying and kind of what my mission is about is it's not only the what of nutrition, okay, what do I eat, but it's also how, right? And it's that preparation. This comes back to exactly what you're saying. That's the first step, the first stage of digestion. Is if we can get our hands on it, preparing it. And I fully agree. I mean, we don't live in a culture, a society. I don't think it's even desirable to go back to creating every single thing we eat from scratch. So I recommend, whatever spectrum you're on, if you got lots of time or a little time, just start with picking one. And fermentation is a great area and avenue to choose, because although commercially a lot of it's becoming more available, there's so much out there, and it's a really, really great craft to get into. And
and you get more, just like I said, that you get more out of the digestion if you're involved with preparing it. You get more enjoyment, more digestion out of it. As far as the whole koji thing, in fact, that's what I had for breakfast this morning. I'm really starting to become very fond of it. The aspergillus is an alternative to the lactobacteria, and point in fact is more of that. Some people consider it the hardest working bacteria in history because that's what you make sake, that's what you make miso, that's how you make soy sauce, and a lot of these quickles I do. So my rice bed is mostly an aspergillus based thing, and it ferments 3 times faster than the lactobacillus. So you can have the lactobacillus at certain times of day. You have the aspergillus or the koji type bacteria during certain parts of the day, and it's a really good ferment additive. And then you become more global, more worldly. You're doing the European tradition, you're doing the Japanese Oriental tradition, and you get a good variety of cosmopolitan bacteria in your body because we live cosmopolitan lives. Even though we might say that we live in the Arctic, living up in Canada, we still have a cosmopolitan life because let's face it, I think it's minus 20 last night in Alberta, and you were not living outside.
Yeah.
You were living in a nice cushy 2022 or whatever the case may be, centigrade or 70, 75 indoors. So we live as if we're in the tropics or at least the temperate zones more than we do in the Arctic zones.
Yeah, no, for sure. I love what you're saying about increasing that diversity, and there's this whole term of being a microbiome, right? That we are actually 10 times more bacteria than we are human cells. So what are the foods and what are the diversity of food sources and fermented foods in particular that we're consuming to continue to add to that biodiversity? I've heard it said that, we as kind of modern humans living in our modern kind of industrial world, that, yes, absolutely. Out in our kind of ecosystems, we're losing plant species, animal species, but within our inner ecosystem, we're actually losing a diversity of bacterial species.
And that's very significant because it is probably more who we are, as you say, 10 to a factor of 10 on a cell count level, the bacteria we are. You are not what you eat, you are what you ferment. That'd be a good license plate pie.
There you go, bumper sticker.
You are what you ferment.
That's right.
And that would be very suitable in China because then you can burp properly too.
Right, yeah. Cool. All right. Well, it's been a great conversation, and my kind of takeaway and where I've landed is just that simplicity, right? Having the mindfulness, having that openness, the 82-18 or 80-20 kind of rule, having that flexibility, emotional aspect and state that you're in, and really being aware of, as you say, tongue to bum, and that's a fantastic series of articles. I really recommend anyone listening dive deeper and really get that in-depth understanding of what's happening. Because like you say, as soon as food passes our lips, past our tongue, we kind of forget about it until the next day. And even then, there isn't that correlation between, unless you're reminded by the beets that you ate and the red color. Very often we don't even...
We freak out at first and go, oh yeah, I ate beets. The asparagus smell that comes out in our urine. Oh my God, what's happening? It smells.
Yeah.
I know lots of people won't eat asparagus as soon as they found out to make their pee smell.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I love the approach of, there's always a time and a place to kind of, go deep into the micro of nutrients of food and kind of figure it out, but really just to pull it back out. If you find yourself like too deep in the micro, pull it back out to the macro and just kind of relook at food in a more holistic way. Think about diversity, think about, fermented foods and the bacteria and culture, right? Being multicultural. I like that. All right. Any kind of final parting thoughts you want to share?
I think you've summed it up very good, Malcolm.
All right. Cool. All right. So
now, where's the food group for chocolate? I just want to make sure that we make sure that people can still have your nice little chocolate treats.
Yeah, that's right. I always want to add in the chocolate, and that's really where the fun comes in, right? And
yeah.
So how can we, like you say, there's all those like shiny 7-Elevens, but what I'm really excited by in our day and age is those 7-Elevens and the foods that are in is representative of those cheap foods or those fun foods or snack foods. That's really increasing. So we can have our fun and eat it too, because the quality just keeps getting better and better, and chocolate's absolutely a great place for that. Making your own highest quality
and what
ingredients.
Those.
Go ahead.
And one of those great little chocolate treats you have is almost as expensive as a chocolate bar you can get at the convenience stores, but it's 10 times more satisfying, and it doesn't have as many calories. So yes, you're paying for quality, But once you let it, if you're mindful of eating it, enjoying it, and let the chemicals go up into your brain, up into your limbic center, to be able to do that, you get way more joy out of it than 5 or 6 Hershey bars.
Yeah, totally. And that reminds me, maybe we should end on this. So you're talking about chocolate and those joy chemicals. It's the phenethylamine, isn't it?
Yes.
All
and,
right.
and, and they really stimulate how our amygdala works, how our pineal gland works, and it opens us to joy. And there's nothing wrong with the love story of chocolate and joy.
All right, cool. Well, stay tuned. We have a little writing project coming up this year, putting together a book on chocolate, and Terry Willard's going to be a part of that. You can hear the love story of chocolate through Terry Willard's words, and bring that to mind anytime you have some chocolate. So, thanks for listening. Check out Terry Willard and his blog. All the links and everything will be below. So, thanks for being on, and look forward to chatting with you again soon.
Talk to you later. Bye.